during the wait for House of the Dragon Season 2, I've been rereading the Dance of the Dragon sections of Fire and Blood in preparation for making some Season 2 history and lore videos. This got me thinking about the difficulties the showrunners are going to have on their hands in terms of Aegon's storyline post-Season 2, specifically the events after the fall of King's Landing to Rhaenyra that I suspect we will see in Season 3. From a screenwriting, storytelling standpoint, the way Aegon's story is handled is going to be an issue when trying to balance telling a compelling story and the reality of production. This has led me to the conclusion that the showrunners are going to have to make some difficult choices when it comes to how they tell Aegon's story in Season 3 and 4, and regardless of what they choose, I think it's one of these situations where there is no easy solution and you're not going to please everybody. The way in which Aegon's story is presented in Fire and Blood after Rhaenyra takes King's Landing has him effectively disappearing from the story, with the readers and characters not knowing where he is and what he's doing. All we know is he's out there somewhere. A big plot point is actually Rhaenyra sending out her Knights Inquisitor looking for Aegon, Jaehaera, and Maelor, with it directly influencing the tragic events that befall Prince Maelor at Bitterbridge. But Aegon is not found, and it's left as this huge mystery for a while. Now, the big plot twist comes after Rhaenyra flees King's Landing, during the Moon of Madness, and just after the destruction of the Dragon Pit. After travelling from town to town in the Crownlands, looking for refuge, being turned away again and again, until she manages to find passage back to Dragonstone. However, as she enters through the gates of the castle, she is greeted by the sight of Sunfire and Aegon, whom have been in control of the castle for some time now. He then proceeds to have Rhaenyra killed by Sunfire. At this point, we as a reader have no idea how Aegon came to be on Dragonstone, and him being there and the death of Rhaenyra is a huge surprise if you come into Fire and Blood not knowing how the story ends. It is then after this we learn exactly what Aegon had been up to for weeks while seemingly vanishing. Larys Strong manages to get him to Dragonstone, disguised as a fisherman, with Aegon spending time there building up his strength and waiting for Sunfire to heal from his wounds from Rook's Rest. Aegon then manages to take Dragonstone by winning the favour of some of the castle's garrison, whom had personal grievances with Rhaenyra. I would argue that if you don't know what's going to happen in the story, Rhaenyra's death and the surprise of Aegon being at Dragonstone is one of the best plot twists in the expanded lore of A Song of Ice and Fire. I can very much see it being something the showrunners are going to want to execute properly if they manage it and adapt the story the way Fire and Blood portrays it, with Aegon going MIA. There will be many fans in for a huge shock given how beloved Rhaenyra has become to much of the more casual audience who perhaps aren't as invested in the lore and haven't picked up Fire and Blood or explored the expanded universe. Her brutal and shocking death could be a TV moment people will be talking about for years if done well. But herein lies the big problem the showrunners are going to have to deal with. A huge part of what makes the plot twist of Rhaenyra's death so impactful is that it really does kind of come out of nowhere, with Aegon just going missing from the pages of history until the reader is recapped on his adventures after his trap has been sprung. Now, if the showrunners want to preserve the surprise of the plot twist, that will mean, like in the book, Aegon in the show will have to disappear for the best part of a season. I question if that is something HBO would be keen on, with Tom Glencarny being part of the main cast and loved by a lot of fans. When it came to Game of Thrones, the showrunners had similar issues when it came to Theon Greyjoy. They chose to reveal the Theon is now Reek plot twist much earlier than the book, namely because they didn't want Alfie Allen sitting on the sidelines for 1 or 2 seasons, but also because, given the nature of adapting a book to screen, to recap all that had happened to Theon off screen for him to become Reek would involve flashbacks, which really would not have given him enough time to tell the story. Plus, generally speaking, though they did do a few flashbacks in Game of Thrones, the showrunners did avoid the use of them for the most part, and even when they did use them, they were smaller parts of episodes. The showrunners of House of the Dragon will have to make a similar decision when it comes to how they approach Aegon on Dragonstone. If they follow the book, then you retain the plot twist of him being on Dragonstone and Rhaenyra's death, followed maybe with the next episode solely dedicated to Aegon, explaining just how he got there and how he took the castle, and generally what he'd been up to. But there is a second approach they might take, a more Theon as Reek approach, where rather than tell Aegon's story retrospectively, after the fact, they tell it over the course of a season parallel with the events of the rest of the season, rather than keeping it a secret. From Aegon leaving King's Landing to his arrival on Dragonstone, hiding out while Sunfire recovers, and him making his plans to take Dragonstone being set in motion. There is more than enough content there to flesh out a full season arc for Aegon. That way, the character remains part of the show and the actor is not sidelined. But then there is a few issues with this approach too, namely that you will lose the sense of mystery and wondering over the course of the story of what happened to Aegon, and most of all, when Rhaenyra arrives on Dragonstone, even fans who don't know how events play out will have some inclination that things are not going to go well for Rhaenyra, given they would already know Aegon had taken Dragonstone. If they did choose to go down this path, what you effectively do is replace the shock of Aegon's reveal and Rhaenyra's death with a sense of foreboding that will only get worse as Rhaenyra moves closer and closer to her inevitable fate as the viewers watch on helpless. Whatever road the showrunners do decide to go down has its positives and has its negatives. Some fans will be happy, some will hate it. But when you are adapting a book to screen, these are the kind of hard creative decisions writers have to make, and sometimes what is best for the show does mean some deviation of how the source material tells its story. Game of Thrones chose to follow Theon's journey into becoming Reek, and while we lost the surprise from the book, we did get some truly harrowing moments showing Theon's transformation that is only left to the imagination in the book. I suspect the showrunners will opt to follow a similar approach of Aegon, and tell his story over the course of a season, replacing the shock of Rhaenyra's death with a larger sense of dread and foreboding that builds up over the season as Rhaenyra gets closer and closer to her inevitable fate. Unlike Game of Thrones, I think the fanbase as a whole more wildly notes the direction Rhaenyra's story is heading in. Thus, maybe trading the surprise for a more well-defined arc for Aegon makes more sense for the show. But what do you guys think of all this? How do you think they're going to handle Aegon's Dragonstone arc? And how do you feel about the prospect of it being changed? Let me know in the comments.